This is John from Clean Codecast, and welcome to my YouTube tutorials. In the last video, we touched on serialization with Jackson. So in this video, I thought I would spice it up a little with including querying from a database. The library we will be using is JetBrains Exposed. We will be using the H2 database in memory option for this to keep it simple. I will go into selecting all records from a table, inserting a record into the database using a post request via curl in the terminal, and getting a specific record using the ID of the row. Alright, let's dive in. Continuing where we left off, we can now go back to the browser and up in the bar type in GitHub JetBrains Exposed. Once you're in that repo, scroll down and click on the Getting Started link. Here you'll see the dependencies that are required. We're going to need core and JDBC. We won't be bringing in DAO because we'll be using the DSL API. So let's grab the first one. We can copy that. We can go back to the code, open up build.gradle.kts, and on a new line, we can do implementation and paste in that package. We can copy that down and add JDBC and save the file. Now we can go back to the browser. We can click on database and data source, and we can see what we need to connect to a database. So let's scroll down and let's pick the database that we choose to connect to. In this case, we're going to choose H2 in memory, just so we can make this easy. So let's copy this one with the db close delay equals -1. We can go back to the code. We can open up the app.kt file. And above routing, we can paste in the DB connection. We'll have to pull in the library to get this database object. So let's import org JetBrains Exposed SQL.star. Now we can go back to the browser and we need to copy this dependency here for the H2 database. Go back to the code to the build.gradle.kts file, and underneath the JetBrains Exposed, we're going to add an implementation and we're going to paste in the H2 database. That should be all the packages we need, so we can go ahead and close the build.gradle.kts file. Now, what else do we need? Well, let's go back to the documentation. Let's scroll back to the top and look at transactions. So it looks like inside of a transaction you can do a user select, a select all, more selects, insert, and schema utils create food table. Okay, well before we do this, we need to create the table object for our users. So let's go to the DSL API, scroll down, and you can see the structure that our table will take. So let's go back to the code, and at the top, below data class users, let's add object users extends table. And inside here, we need to add val ID. It's a type column of int. It equals an integer. And the column name is ID. And it's going to auto increment. On another line, val name column string equals varchar, the column name, 255 characters long, new line, val age, column int equals integer, and the name of that column is age. Now we have to override val primary key equals primary key, passing in the ID variable, the name, and we'll call this pk user ID for the index name. Now that we have a table to create, below the database.connect, we can add transaction, open close curly brace, and in there, schema utils.create users. This will create the database table for us after the connection is established. So now we just need to import transaction from the exposed library. Import org JetBrains Exposed SQL transactions transaction. So now that we have a table created, we can insert some records for querying later. We can do that by going users, insert, open and close curly brace. On a new line, square brackets, users, name equals John. We can copy that down, delete John and say 36 and replace name with age. I think you can see where we're going. We're essentially replicating the data that we were statically returning before, except this time we're going to add a couple more. So let's copy that down a couple times. We're going to name this Jack, Jill, and we'll say Jack's 21 and Jill's 24. We can go ahead and save that. Now, we can add the ID to the user data class because we almost forgot. Give it a question mark and it's going to default to null, and we can save that. Now, if we scroll down, we can see that user is no longer working because these are not named and we're not passing in at least one. Before we adjust these GET requests, I want to change this up a little bit. I'm going to move this, the install content negotiation with Jackson, to the top. Then I'm going to keep the database in the middle, and I'm going to keep my routes right here at the bottom, except I'm going to do something different. On a new line, I'm going to say install, and I'm going to say routing, and then inside here I'm going to say route, and I'm going to say user, and inside of here I'm going to have a get / and then below that we'll have the post / copy this one out of the post and put it back in and delete the rest. Now, inside the get, we can say val users equals transaction. And then in there, we can go users.selectAll.map, open and close curly brace. And then we can say users. We're going to create a function called toUser, and we're going to pass in that iteration. So now we need to create this method. Let's scroll back up to the top. And inside the users table, we're going to call a function toUser taken in a row with the result row, returning a user. And on a new line, we're going to say user name equals row users name. We're going to say age equals row users age. And if you want the ID, you can go ahead and pass the ID back. I'm going to do that. ID equals row users ID, comma. Now we have something to return it back as. So we can scroll back down, and in the GET request, we can do call respond users. We can go ahead and save it. Now we can switch back over to the terminal, and we can type Gradle run. And in the other tab, now we can type curl HTTP. And this time the routing is /user since we changed it. And there you have it. You can see the first user that was inserted, the second user, and the third, John, Jack, and Jill. Now let's go back to the other tab and we can stop running our project. We can now switch back to our code, and we are now going to handle the post request. So inside the post request, we can add transaction, open close curly braces, users insert. And on a new line, we can say it users name equals user name. And on a new line, it users age equals user age. So what we're doing here is we're taking in that user data class that comes from a JSON object from the post, and we're going to insert a new record using its name and age. We're not setting an ID since it was auto increment. And then we are returning the user that we took in for now. Go ahead and save the file, switch back to your terminal, run the project, switch to the other tab, and now you can run curl -H in double quotes content type application JSON. Close it with the double quote space -D lowercase single quotes, and now we're going to make a JSON string. We're going to say name, we'll call Mark, age, and we'll say 83 to HTTP 8080/user. There. You see that the ID is null, the name is Mark and 83. It's null because we didn't pass in an ID, and we also didn't return the inserted ID with the user object. But now that we have that inserted, we can now press up a couple of times to get the GET request, and it should now show 4 users. And there you have it, 1, 2, 3, and 4, the new ID of Mark, who is 83. Now we can go to the other tab, stop our server from running, and switch back to the code. We're going to add one more route so we can query by a given parameter. We can start by copying this GET down one, give it a line for space, and here let's pass in the query parameter of ID. Then we can add val ID equals call.parameters, and in square brackets the name of the parameter ID. And then we know it's not going to be null, so double exclamation dot toInt and save it. Now we can update the select all to be select, and instead of parentheses we'll add curly braces users dot ID eq ID and save it. Now we can switch back to our terminal, run the project, switch to the other tab, and instead of doing just the /user, we can do /user2. And there, it returned the user Jack, who's 21, ID 2. Now, what happened there? We didn't get Mark back, but we've inserted Mark before. Well, that's because we're using the h2 mem. It's only persistent for as long as our web server is alive. So when we shut our web server down before we added that new GET, we essentially cleared it out. So when we started it back up, we ended up with the same 3 as before. We can see that by pressing up, remove the 4, and you'll see the original 3 users that get inserted at the start of the web server. To wrap this up, we brought in the Exposed library by JetBrains, created a table object for the users table so we can select and insert records from and to the database. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did and want more, just click that subscribe button. If there is anything specific you want to see in the future, please leave a comment below or just say hi. And as always, this is John from Clean Codecast signing off.